Welcome back. So we've got a supply and a demand curve. We're looking at the market for dog food, and we've sketched out where consumer surplus and producer surplus are here. Now, let's think about what happens if the Commonwealth of Kentucky comes in and says, you should not be able to charge more than $8 for a bag of dog food because there are dog owners who are in tough places and we should not allow these animals to suffer just because their owners don't have enough money to buy expensive $10 bags of dog food. So if we put in a price ceiling at $8, I'm going to draw that as a line right here. So a price ceiling, I'm going to write P max equals 8, saying we can't charge more than $8 for a bag of dog food. Now, we've already talked about what that'll do. It means that people want to buy at $8, they want to buy more dog food than they did at $10 because it's cheaper, right? Law of demand says, yeah, we'll move along that demand curve, we'll want to buy more. But producers only want to make that much. So how much is actually bought and sold in the market? It's this much. Because that's how much producers want to make at $8. Now, what has happened here? So we've talked about how, okay, we've got the difference between quantity demanded and quantity supplied. That means we now have a shortage, right? People wanting more than is available. There's going to be empty shelves at the store. So we've talked about that already. But let's think now about consumer surplus and producer surplus. So we've got our shaded in areas already. We need to, I'm going to take my line up here to the demand curve because we've got a few new areas to look at. Now, we've said that consumer surplus is the area below the demand curve above the price in the market. So all of this green area right here, that's still consumer surplus. This person's willing to pay 20 bucks for a bag of dog food. They were really excited when they could buy it for 8. They're even more excited when they can buy it for, they were excited at 10. They're even more excited at 8. So we're actually going to be adding this area to consumer surplus. Now we're not going to go all the way over there because we're only selling this much. So the quantity bought and sold in the market is right here. But so our new consumer surplus area is that area. What does our new producer surplus look like? Well, above the supply curve, up to the price in the market, it's just this little sliver right there. Now, what about this area? Turns out that's a really important area within economics. We'll talk about it later when we get to taxes and why it's so important. But we get to learn about it here. There's both consumer surplus and producer surplus that is essentially lost. Why? Because we have fewer transactions in the marketplace because of that price ceiling than we did if we were at equilibrium. So this area, these are all the people who would like to buy dog food, but they can't, right? So these are some of the people who are making up that shortage. And there are people who make dog food who would be happy to be making it and selling it right now if it were $10, but with the price ceiling at $8, they're not. And so we've lost these transactions within the marketplace by putting in that ceiling. We call that a deadweight loss. A deadweight loss. That's the area of surplus that we lose when we have some kind of intervention in the market. So if we have a binding price ceiling like this one, where the max price is lower than what the equilibrium price would be, we're not allowing prices to go to equilibrium. So this government policy is actually causing fewer transactions to take place, and we're losing out on both consumer surplus and producer surplus, and we have this deadweight loss area. So this is, when we talked about efficiency before, deadweight loss is inefficient. Why? Well, because we've made both consumers and producers worse off by taking away this whole area of benefits that people would get from transactions in the marketplace. With that said, who does well with this price ceiling? As you can see, so we lost some area. That's lost. No one gets that. But we can see the green area took on this new rectangle. The supplier area actually lost that same area, right? So consumers actually do relatively well if there's a binding price ceiling. And again, this fits with an intuition that consumers like low prices. So if there's a binding price ceiling, that's generally speaking good for consumers. Who's it bad for? It's bad for producers, right? They get just this sliver of producer surplus. The thing to remember, and something economists often remind politicians about, is even if consumers seem pretty happy with this binding price ceiling, we need to keep in mind that we're taking a hit on efficiency. We're losing benefits to both consumers and producers by putting in this policy that restricts how much is bought and sold in the market. We've got a deadweight loss in there. And so economists often talk about deadweight loss as this thing we really want to avoid. So that's the story with the price ceiling and what it does for consumer surplus, producer surplus. It creates some deadweight loss. You could imagine producers are not happy with this at all. So, if we have something like a rent control program that doesn't allow rents to go up to what equilibrium price would be, consumers may be pretty happy with this idea. Landlords are not. And economists tend to be the ones who point out, hey, we actually have fewer units available because of this policy. We would have more transactions going on in the marketplace if we let the market do its thing. Now, we can flip the script a little bit and talk about what happens if we have a price floor. So we've got price and quantity. We've got the people who are grabbing the wrong markers, but that's okay. We've got the people who want to buy dog food. We've got the people who want to sell dog food. And so let's mark our equilibrium here. Now, let's say the government feels bad for the people who make and sell dog food. The industry is having a tough time in this era of COVID, and they say, listen, we're going to help you out. We're going to make a price floor for dog food. We're going to say a bag of dog food can't sell for less than 12 bucks. So if the equilibrium price was 10 before, a $12 minimum price floor, is going to be binding, right? And so again, we've already talked about how, well, the people who make dog food are going to want to sell quite a bit at 12 bucks each, but people are only going to actually want to buy this much. So this is going to be how much actually gets bought and sold in this market. So let's look at I'm going to mark where the consumer surplus was in the equilibrium with no price floor, the green area, producer surplus, pink area, right? Now let's look at it with the price floor in effect. So the consumers are getting this much. The producers are now, it goes above the supply curve up to the price in the market. So the producers have picked up this rectangle here, that used to be consumer surplus. And as we saw before, there's going to be this area, this triangle that is lost. That's our deadweight loss. And again, that's taking away from both consumers and producers. So with a price floor, we have an inefficient outcome because we lose the surplus that comes with all of these transactions in the marketplace, creating a deadweight loss. We also see some of what used to be consumer surplus being shifted over to the producers by setting that high price. And again, it's kind of intuitive. If we force prices to be high, that's bad for consumers, but the people selling stuff are pretty happy. And so this is why farmers selling produce, well, less produce and more different commodities, are strong supporters of these ag subsidies that have price floors. So wheat, corn, milk, sugar, things like that. They like it when the government says, okay, we're going to make sure the price stays above a certain level. Well, that ends up giving producers a bigger surplus area, right? What does it do to consumers? Consumers take a big hit. They're paying higher prices now. But economists, again, remind people that, and everyone in some way is taking this hit by having lost efficiency, by having deadweight loss. So consumer surplus, producer surplus, put them together and you have total surplus. Economists want to see that as big as possible. Policies like price ceilings and price floors, they make it not as big as possible because there's a deadweight loss area. We're having fewer transactions in the marketplace. That means people gain less from buying and selling stuff. We have less surplus than before. Although how well consumers and producers do depends on whether we're keeping prices artificially low, which consumers like, or we're keeping prices artificially high, which producers like. So there we are with consumer and producer surplus and things like interventions in the marketplace. And again, we'll talk about some other ones as we go on with the semester. But now we know what deadweight loss is, and that's like a 4-letter word for economists. So yeah, we'll hear about that some more. Thanks.